So next question is from Stickman Sam. He says, David, as a former atheist, what's your advice for Christians on how to share the gospel with atheists?
Deconverted man, how do you share the idea of not believing in this particular God with a Christian? Being a former Christian yourself, of course, that gives you more legitimacy to be able to answer that question somehow, on top of just, asking you the question. I don't know why you being a former Christian matters, but I'm going to mention that you were a former Christian. So, Deconverted man, how would you share skepticism? How would you share doubting God to a Christian? Well, that's a very good question, Deconverted man. Let me answer that question by first saying that it depends on what evidence they would accept to think that their idea is wrong. You see, some Christians are not willing to ever let go of their faith. One example is Ken Ham. During his debate with Bill Nye on evolution versus creationism, there was a question asked at the very end, what would change your mind? And then Ham says that he's a Christian, and so there's nothing that would change his mind. Whereas Bill Nye says, evidence. So there are some Christians, it seems, that would never accept any amount of evidence, no matter what it was presented to them, no matter what question you answered. Let's say that we have completely solved what consciousness is, and that we understand how the universe came to be what it is, and all of these difficult scientific questions that are still on the brink of being answered were answered. Well, for some, they would still say, oh, but there's a God behind all that. So for some Christians and for some theists, not necessarily just Christians, but for some, faith is something that they would never, ever give up, no matter what.
Step number one, and I don't think lots of Christians do this, is trying to figure out what level of skepticism this person has, right? Like some people are just, they haven't heard a good argument for theism, but...
Well, I've heard many arguments for this particular brand of theism, and they all have logical fallacies. So I haven't heard or read one that is free of logical fallacies yet, but if you think you have one, present it for the love of humanity.
If you gave them one, they would, think about it and consider it and decide whether it's a good argument. And others, they've adopted a methodology that is actually impervious to evidence.
Right.
Like Dawkins recently admitted this. He was being interviewed, and he's asking what would qualify as evidence for the existence of God. And he said, years ago I would have said, God writing his name in the sky or something like this, or a miracle or something like this. But I've come to realize that there's nothing that God could do that I couldn't just say aliens did it. Right. If God arranged the stars to say something specifically to us, I could say, well, maybe they're powerful enough aliens who have done this. And so
I wonder if you take this as seriously as you should. The thing is, identifying God is harder than you think it is. And I'll just assume that there is an actual God for the sake of this analogy here. Let's say that there is a God, but the actual God is vastly different from your concept of what your God should be. And this actual God appears in all its glory and glowiness and feelings of love or whatever. And it does, X, Y, and Z miracle and, whatever. Now, standing before this actual God with your perceived concept of what you believe God is, would you just let that concept go and say, oh, I was wrong, this is the real God? Or would you say, well, hold on a minute there, bub. You're just pretending to be the real God. My God's not you, and you're a false God, and I demand to see my God. I'm just going to wait out until the real God comes along because you're not the actual God. You're not the God that's in my head. You're not the God that I've been worshiping and believing in. So this is a test. Now, some people that think that Revelations is meant to be taken as like an end times narrative rather than just being about King Nero, which that's probably what it is, but nonetheless, these people have the idea of the Antichrist. So somebody that will be given the powers of a god, sort of. Not like every power, but they'll have the abilities of God to some extent. Like they can do things that look miraculous, but they're not. And this is all just to trick people into believing that that is God. But see, the people that understand that, they'll know that first one, he's the fake, and then the next one that comes along is the true God. Okay? So if this God showed up, the real God showed up, and said, no, look, that Bible, that's not true. None of that was true. Yeah, I know I'm showing up first, and you were expecting me to be the false one, but no, I'm the actual God. There isn't any other gods coming along. What could that God possibly do to convince the Christian that they were wrong? Because everything that God could do, from the Christian's point of view, could just be a test of their faith in what they think is their God, which they think is the real God, and they're just biding their time waiting for the real God to reveal itself, all the while this actual God is doing all of these amazing, impossible things, whatever, and they're just not convinced by it because they don't believe that that's the actual God. So, I guess I could summarize this by saying, 2Q, you as well. You do the same things. You have the same problems as a staunch, over-the-top skeptic might have regarding a God being able to prove that it's God. The Christian has just as many problems identifying a God if the thing that appears to be godlike is not within their preconception of what God is. They would absolutely, without a doubt, reject that God. You must ask yourself, what would it take to convince me that a different God was an actual God other than the God I currently believe in? And whatever that evidence is, that's just, or whatever argument that is, whatever it is that would take to convince you, should be something that your own religion can offer to somebody else. And if not, then you need to question your religion. Maybe, just maybe, it's not the true one. Maybe, just maybe, it's not correct.
Christians need to understand the level of skepticism of the person that they're dealing with, because if you're talking to a person to a person who's saying, "Give me evidence," but they have a methodology that doesn't allow any evidence, you're just wasting your time there until you deal with that issue. So lots of times, if it's an atheist, and I think he might be the variety of atheists who has made has constructed a methodology that doesn't allow any kind of evidence.
I just did a recent video on that, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. I normally start. I normally start. They say, "Give me evidence for the existence of God," and I go, "Okay, first, give me evidence that you exist."
Shifting the burden of proof, a red herring, and a non sequitur all wrapped in one. Or a better way to put it might be, that's just plain stupid. There is no reason to doubt that the person that you are currently talking to does not exist. And if you think that there is a reason to doubt that, then that's a good argument for skepticism, not for pure faith or whatever. So here's the thing. The minute that you would say, "Oh, prove you exist," see, because I think that you're the sort of atheist that has this requirement that I can't meet. So I'm going to derail the conversation because you're not worth my time. Just walk away then. Just walk away. Don't engage them. If you truly think that they're not worth your time, then don't spend your time on them. But that's a conclusion that you've arrived to based on what? Based on what they've said, or what you think they've said, or what they've written, or what you think they've written. And you're just going to go, oh, they're a waste of time. And this is an excuse to walk away from that. I've had plenty of people over the time that I've been on YouTube tell me that, it's a waste of time trying to convince you, or that, I'm not going to debate you because of this or that or whatever. And I've had people say, prove you exist to me. And I just shake my head every time. It's just like, that's ridiculous. It's completely, utterly ridiculous, and just plain stupid to say that. You're not adhering to the burden of proof. You're not answering my question. You're not behaving in a social way. And now I suspect that something is amiss here. Let's just say that you went to a car dealership because you wanted a new car. And you said, I'd like to see the latest model. And they said, aha, prove you exist first, and then I'll show you the latest model. What? I just want a new car. No. You can't see the new car until you prove that you're actually here to buy it. I want to see that you have actual money, and you need to show me your bank account statement so that I know that you have enough money to buy this car. Actually, on a side tangent, there was this guy that went to, I saw this video, this guy went to car dealerships, really expensive car dealerships, dressed like, just an average guy, or just kind of like a homeless guy or whatever, and, they didn't want to give him the time of day because they assumed that he didn't have money, and actually it turns out that he does, he's like a millionaire or whatever, and so it's like, yeah, don't judge a book by its cover, right? That's something that we typically should know. You don't know. You try to make the sale. Maybe it's a waste of your time, and maybe it isn't, but you don't have any idea if you don't try. But no, let's just assume that they're a waste of time and derail the conversation and not engage with them and not offer them any proof, by the way. Because you don't have any to offer. That's the other problem, is you don't have anything to offer. And even if you did, that something could still be questioned, which you dismiss as being ridiculous because you're not thinking of the idea that maybe an actual thing that's actually God might be different than your God, and that you would be in the same boat if that was true. But you don't believe that that's the case. See, I think that a skeptic confronted with an actual God might be skeptical that it's God at first. But given enough time to study this phenomenon, I think that they would just say, well, yeah, you're probably God. Because, speaking for myself, I don't hold any attachment to the word God. So if the dang thing wants to be called God, I'll be like, all right, you're God, whatever. I don't care. Why should I care? That word doesn't really mean that much to me. Now, it might not be God. Maybe it's lying to me, but what do I care? I mean, it's like it did all this weird stuff, and it's like, all right, whatever. You want to be called God, you're God. Whatever, I don't care. Now, if it wants to be worshipped or obeyed, I'm not going to do those things. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do those things. I don't care how powerful you are. I'm just not going to do that. And you shouldn't ask me, and if you're so powerful, why would you want those things anyways? But that's an additional problem with the God concept is what it would request of you to do. I don't think that a true / real God would make any request of me, because it already can do everything. Why would it need me to do anything at all? Why would it need me to care about it or be its friend or anything? It wouldn't. It wouldn't need me at all. It wouldn't need me to do anything. What does God need with a starship? Absolutely nothing. It can make a billion starships. It can make infinity starships. So God shouldn't need anything from me if it's actually God. Now, if it's an alien, then maybe it does need me to worship it or obey it without question because it wants to enslave humanity, for example. And so people that don't obey it are a detriment to its plan. But if it has all this power, then what does it need with humans anyways? Couldn't it just make robots to do its bidding? So, there's question marks there that I can't fill in with answers, but there are reasons to doubt, and it's good to doubt.
Because I don't want to be talking to a non-existent person here.
Right.
And then they say, it's usually typing, right? They're sending me messages, and then they type back, what do you mean? Obviously I exist because I'm sending you a message.
Right.
So I type back and I go, well, yeah, there's a message, but I mean, it could be monkeys mindlessly pounding on a keyboard. Right. Obviously, if DNA can form on its own, some monkeys can type this sort of message, especially with all these misspellings and so on.
Right.
And so, I type a message back like that.
Yeah.
And this is the worst way to convince anybody of anything other than you're dishonest. You're being a troll. You're not engaging in the question. You're not engaging in discussion. You're just trying to dismiss them, and they'll just walk away upset, irritated, and angry. But the thing that you just said about DNA makes me question if you were in fact an atheist, because it's been my observation, and because it's an appeal to a minority of one, you get to be skeptical that it is indeed my observation, and even if it is my observation, you still get to be skeptical of it, is that atheists tend to accept and understand biological evolution. But you said this.
Obviously, if DNA can form on its own, some monkeys...
And that makes me think that you don't have a clue what evolution is or how it works or anything. And that's something that, like, a creationist would say, not somebody that had been an atheist, unless, like, they were an atheist that just was completely unaware of science or evolution, like they didn't know anything. But I mean, I guess they could exist, hypothetically. I haven't encountered that person myself, so I just my cognitive dissonance is kicking in, and my personal incredulity is rising as I say, no, there is no atheist that's out there that would not understand enough about evolution to make this stupid statement, even if they became a theist, unless maybe once you become a theist, you lose your brain or something.
If we keep going back and forth and they keep giving me reasons to believe that they exist, and I dismiss them, and then eventually they'll say something like, well, I'll come to your city and I'll show myself to you. I'm going, how will I know I'm not dreaming? Right. How will I know I'm not in the Matrix? Right. How will I know that I'm not a brain in a vat that some mad scientist is making me think that you're appearing to me? How can I know? In other words, I'm becoming a hyper skeptic, but applying it to them to show them, hey, this is what you do with God.
Right.
Hard solipsism. So this is the idea that we have recognized as a species that our sensory inputs can fail us. You can lose your sight, hearing, your ability to sense touch and heat, and you can lose your mind as well. You can begin to see things that aren't there, hear things that aren't there, smell things that aren't there. You can have entire worlds that aren't really there in your brain, and you could come to believe that that's reality. And how in the world do we know that that is reality versus this reality? How do we know that reality is real? The only thing that we can know for sure is that the self exists. I think, therefore I am. You exist. You can know that for sure. I exist. I can know that for sure. But everything and anything else on top of that is up for grabs, because even my body could be something that I'm fooled into thinking that exists. But there is a me thinking, so that me, whatever that is the only thing I can be really sure of. And maybe not even that. But because of this, therefore, well, how do we know anything? We don't. That's the thing. We can't really know. And nobody has solved this. There is no solution to this. It's just a philosophical quandary. It's like, yeah, It could all just be an illusion. It could be the Red King's dream. It could be this. It could be that. It could be any number of things, but I don't have evidence that it is. I don't have evidence that I'm in the Truman Show. So I shouldn't think that I am unless I have evidence that I am. Just because it could be that I'm hallucinating doesn't therefore mean I am hallucinating. I need some sort of proof that I'm hallucinating all of this. And if I am, well, then that's a problem. But if I'm not, then it's not. But we assume certain things. We assume that we can perceive reality as good as most people on the bell curve. We assume that reality is real, and then we move on from there. So this, quote, hyper-skepticism, end quote, that you're talking about isn't even really worth that much of consideration. It is, for a little bit. Hard solipsism is something to consider for a moment. Like, that's a problem. But here's the thing. If there's a God, it built that into the whole creation. So it built the fact that we can't always trust our own brain into the equation of living life. Why would God ever do that? That's stupid.
This is what you do when I give an argument for God. So why am I going to give you an argument for the existence of God when all you're going to do is play skeptic? And I can do that too. And if I play skeptic like you do, you can't even prove to me that you exist.
Ha 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 ha. I win without even having to debate you. Ha 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 ha. You're stupid. Okay. Fine. You want to play hyper skeptic, even though you don't understand how that works. Okay, fine. I want the same amount of evidence that I exist for God. Let's start there. Okay? That's it. Give me the same amount of evidence that I have for my existence for your idea of God, whatever that is, whatever your version of God is. I require the equal amount of evidence of my own existence for God. Your analogy has completely and utterly fallen apart at this point. Your tactic to derail the conversation, your tactic to cause them to realize that they're being over the top, that they're being too skeptical, has all been dismantled in this simple request. Okay, I exist. And obviously, you don't doubt that I exist. And that's obvious because the only reason you're doing your little super skepticism thing is to try to make a point. Okay, great. So you exist, and I exist, and we have ample evidence that each other exists. And we'll accept all of that, because without that, we can't even have a conversation, can we? So I would like as much evidence that I have for my own existence for God. Please present me with that. Now, he could say, well, but you can't prove you exist. Ha 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 ha. No. I'm already assuming that I do exist and that I've proven that I exist to you. I want the same amount of proof for God. Do you have that? Yes or no? And they're not gonna give you an answer, because the answer is no. The answer is no. They don't have that for God. They do not have the same amount of evidence for existence. They don't. But they won't say no, because that would ruin it. The whole thrust of apologetics is to pretend that there's evidence or an argument for God, but there isn't. It's just faith. Now, my brother, as I said, I call him reasonable theist, because regarding God, his statement is,
it's purely by faith.
Good.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the point there is to show them that if that's their methodology, they've got a flawed methodology. Now, if at the end of all that they say, no, I'm not like that. I'm not like that, and it becomes clear in the discussion that they're not like that, then I would move forward. But if it becomes clear in the conversation that they are these hyper skeptical people, I'm not gonna move beyond the phase of you've got a problem in your methodology.
Right.
And why in the world would you be asking me for evidence when you've made it completely irrelevant.
Right. Yeah.
Like I don't walk around going, show me a square circle. Why? Because I don't even believe that a square circle is possible. So I'm not going to be going around asking people for evidence of it. Right.
All right. Who's making the claim that there's square circles? Who are these people? Show me them. Oh, wait. They don't exist, right? Like, okay. Let me ask this, though. If there was a large enough group of people that were making this claim, would you want them to prove it? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know. But let's just say that they were also large enough of a group that they started influencing politics and were like, hey, yeah, we want the controversy of the square circle taught in schools. Would that begin to worry you? What if they were like, it's okay, and in fact it's a requirement that we indoctrinate our children with the belief of the square circle and that we tell them that it's real despite there not being any evidence? And if anyone dares ask us to prove it, we'll ask them to prove that they're real first. They can't do that. Would you then speak out against the square circle people? Or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know.
But these guys, they've made their worldview immune to evidence that conflicts with their worldview, and then they ask for evidence against it. And so it's like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, that's good. And I noticed that in your debates too. I noticed a lot of times when you debate atheists, I've noticed you always press them for a criteria that they would say or something that would qualify for evidence for God's existence.
And again, it's been my observation that apologists will flip the script. If I say, well, I need God to do X, Y, and Z, they will say, well, my God won't do X, Y, and Z. So if they said, I will believe in God if and only if you can get your God to make my computer table levitate off the ground, they'll say, well, the God's not going to do that. Why not? Because reasons. Well, then I'm not going to believe in it because that's my only requirement. But the real God's not going to make your thing levitate because it's God and it's bigger than you and it doesn't need to prove itself to you. Well, then I guess I don't believe in it because it's not going to do the thing that I want it to. If I asked somebody that's a human to lift my desk up, they might do it. They might not do it, but at least I know that they could potentially do it. I said, okay, look, I'll buy your product if you lift my desk up. Well, I want you to buy my product, so I'm going to lift my desk up. Okay, well, you did that, now I'm going to buy your product. But God won't even lift my desk up, so why should I buy his product? If I say, well, look, I need to be able to see God like I do with any other object. Well, you can't see God, it's invisible. Okay. Well, then, why were you even asking me for the evidence that I would take for God when every single bit of evidence that I require for God, you're going to just say, well, God's not going to give that to you. Because you already have a preconceived notion of what God is and the sort of evidence that that particular version of God would give to people. So asking what I would require for God, it doesn't matter. Because it's not going to be your God anyways. Because I require the same thing I require for everything else. And that has been and will continue to be empirical evidence and or repeatable test and or a valid and sound argument. And unless and until we have that, we should be skeptical of the conclusions.